This next segment is kind of born out of something that's not really a Scottish football story, but something that's quite close to the game up here. Down in England, we saw Luton Town defender Tom Lockyer, who suffered a heart attack on the pitch at the weekend, with the game being abandoned. It was the second time that this has actually happened to Tom after a similar incident in the playoffs at the end of the season, last season that is. So we wanted to look into what's really being done in our game to help, or the overall game, to help spot and prevent these issues. So I'm really pleased to say we're actually joined by a genuine doctor, which is great. Hearts club doctor, that is, Dr. Michael Campbell. Thanks so much for giving us your time, Michael. It's really good to kind of get to the heart of it, of matters. Sorry for the old pun. That's terrible, isn't it? We've even got that. It's the fact that it's the Hearts Club doctor as well. I'll stop the jokes now because this is no laughing matter. But tell me, what's being done in our game to help spot and prevent these sorts of things at the moment? Because this is kind of important now. We look back at 16 years ago
Mhm.
when we saw, legend that is Phil O'Donnell, who passed away on the pitch as well.
Yes, I think that's why it's always going to be very close to the Scottish game after that incident, which everyone remembers, and that certainly led to kind of intensification of things were already in motion, but certainly in the last 15 years, it'll be things have moved on a lot in terms of what we do. Thankfully these things are rare. So it's roughly kind of 1 in 40 to 1 in 80,000, depending on what gets quoted, as to how often there's a sudden cardiac death. And thankfully, some of these incidents don't end in deaths, and that's thankfully quite a lot of them don't end in deaths, and that's becoming more and more the case thanks to what does happen. Um, in terms of Scottish football, I can certainly speak for what we do at Hearts. So what we do is a kind of baseline screening with all of our full-time professional players, where you take a history, where you check for cardiac symptoms such as kind of chest pain, lightheadedness, palpitations, so feeling like your heart's racing, and shortness of breath. Another very important thing would be family history, which can give quite can be quite a predictor of cardiac risk. Each player in Scottish football, in the Scottish professional leagues, so the Scottish Premiership down to League Two, through their career, they'll have one SFA-funded cardiac screen. So that's an ECG, an echocardiogram, which are two different tests, one looking at the electrical activity of the heart, and having a look at kind of cardiac rhythm with a player as it happens to be at rest, and then the echocardiogram, which is the kind of cold jelly scan through the chest wall, looking at the structure and the flow of blood through the heart in real time. And when you put these two together, you get a nice picture of the kind of wiring and structure of the heart. And that can pick up things like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is often cited as the cause of many of these cardiac arrest episodes. So that's a wee bit of the background of what we do. Now we pick up, we certainly do pick things up from that, and all of these things, I should add, are all kind of, they're not looked at by people like myself. I'm not a cardiologist, never mind a cardiologist who specialises in sport and young athletes. So they all go to a cardiologist who's attached through with the SFA, and I think has been for many years, who looks at all of the results coming through, and uses this kind of wealth of experience to be able to pick things up. And often with the clubs, like I say, it happens with all the professional clubs. It's once in their at least once in their career, but as you move up, certainly it's something that, for UEFA clubs going to compete in UEFA competition, it's a case of you get an ECG every year, so that's the one with the 12 leads across your chest, and then the echo, which is the one that looks at the structure and the flow. You get that every 2 years at clubs competing in European competition.
How does this vary in terms of the age levels across the club? So is it just the first team that get this? Is it a certain, like when you turn 16, 18 or whatever? When does it start? You start looking at players?
Generally it's when they turn 16 or when they sign their professional contract, whenever that may be. So certainly we've once we have players graduating up to the under 18 squad, then they will start to get their screening done. I believe if you're particularly talented young footballer and you're representing the SFA, or your own nationality nation, then you will get that screening done if your team's qualified for a finals of, say, the Euro under 17s or something of that ilk. They all need to have it done as well. So it's kind of, some of it's through kind of UEFA stipulation, and then some of it's through funded by the SFA for all professional footballers.
The rules and regulations that are in place now, Michael, are these ones that are agreed upon by the SFA, or are these directives that come collectively from UEFA that then filter out through all the organisations across Europe?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know all the kind of how the policies have all come about, but essentially UEFA stipulates certain things to the SFA, and certainly any clubs that are going to be competing in UEFA competition have rules that if they don't follow them, then they are liable to being either fined or not permitted to compete. I would say, and I think partly on the back of the Phil O'Donnell situation, however, it could have predated that. That was before I was working in Scottish football. It was before I was a doctor. But certainly, the SFA has funded it, on a more extended basis than, and I think I'm right in saying that they were quite ahead of the curve at that time with that, and they've continued to do that for all the professional clubs, because these tests, it should be said, they take expert interpretation. The echoes in particular take very trained hands to actually undertake the investigation itself. So they're not things that come cheaply. So that's where the limitation comes, because it's something that would no doubt like to do for as many people as they can.
What's the procedure then, Michael, if you do spot an irregularity? Because I think this happened with Connor Goldson, didn't it? Something quite innocent was spotted. Something was spotted in quite an innocent test, and then he got it solved quite straightforwardly. What happens?
And he was
then
24,
like
Laura. He was 24 as well, I think, which is obviously a long time after these sort of things would be being checked. So it's quite a later. These things can change, Michael.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that is one thing of being a footballer at a higher level. You will tend to get these things checked, on an annual basis. So every club I've worked for, which includes a club in the Scottish Championship and two different clubs up in the Scottish Premiership, have done an ECG with all of their first team players every year, and the echo scan every 2 years. So the more information they get, and over time, certainly normal results over that time gives you, further reassurance than just a one-off normal, although that is the biggest reassurance in the first instance. In terms of abnormalities getting picked up, they do. Athletes' hearts are different than people who are less athletic. They're putting their heart through more strain. Their heart muscles tend to be a bit bigger. So it's not unusual for things to be picked up. It's, say, not unusual. It's uncommon. However, it's there. It happens, and I'd imagine there's a collection of players each year that have to go through, potentially more stringent tests, or they might need to have a face-to-face with a sports cardiologist, for example. Some of the further tests can be like a cardiac MRI, which looks at the heart in a different way again. Sometimes it can be a exercise stress test, where they'll have the heart monitored as they are working up through exercise and as they increase their heart rate over a certain level.
I just wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned there, Michael, about the fact that football players or elite athletes they do have bigger muscles, they do put their body under such immense strain. And at the elite end of the game, I think, the incidents that always come to mind with this, specifically, I think for us as Scottish football fans, Phil O'Donnell is the most shocking. But these are not uncommon sights, tragically. We can all remember like Fabrice Muamba, Christian Eriksen at the Euros.
Mm-hmm.
These things happen. And I mean, rarely, given the amount of football that's played around the world, but they're still shocking when they do happen.
Absolutely.
I remember reading an article a couple of years ago, I think, and it was highlighting the strain that elite athletes, especially at the top end, maybe at the EPL level of the game and playing in Champions League and international tournaments, are under. And I think they'd taken Spurs' Son Heung-min as an example. So I think around about 2019, during that calendar year, I think he played something like 80 games of football during that calendar year. And that's a mix of club and international. In your professional opinion, do you think the demands on players, maybe in general, but certainly towards the elite end of the game, are too much? Like, are human bodies designed for this amount of physical strain?
I mean, certainly, I think there's, that's obviously been discussed a lot in regards to kind of musculoskeletal injuries and particularly kind of muscle injuries. And how often they're happening. I know it's a big feature again down south this year, where the games are extended further with the kind of more attention to time wasting, etc. And I know the clubs there are not necessarily happy about it. In terms of cardiac strain and cardiac risk with that, from what I've not seen anything that I've not read anything that's kind of looked into that in detail. And thankfully, in some ways, because these things are so rare, it's harder to get that accurate detail from that. Where you can do huge analysis of hamstring injuries because there's six a squad all the time, versus versus these, which are thankfully very rare incidents. I mean, certainly these episodes that you highlighted, I think Mark Vivian Foe was one who unfortunately died on the pitch, and I think since then there's been this kind of sea change in structure and organisation and knowledge and just kind of professionalism around football in terms of how these things are approached. And thankfully, with that, there's a marked change and kind of positive outcome with these things. As much as it's these sort of incidents always bring it to everyone's attention, and they're always shocking and upsetting for those involved, be them teammates or even I'm sure on Saturday's case, the fans watching on. But thankfully, most of these cases of sudden cardiac arrest, can be promptly treated with with getting shocks, with getting shocked by a defibrillator, and that is that I would say, despite all this screening that we do, where we do pick up some things that put you at higher risk, these things can still happen. So that's where staff training at football clubs is probably the biggest factor in how we change how outcomes are with this. I can speak again for Hearts. We ensure that every training session that happens, certainly with our first team and B team, which are our two kind of full professional teams, there is a clinician, either a physiotherapist or a doctor, at each training session, before a ball's kicked until the end, until the last player leaves the pitch. And I think what is common to just about every club in the league, they'll have, all of the equipment there on site, ready to go, in terms of the defibrillator and other kind of emergency life-saving equipment. And there really is, more so than if it happened to somebody on Sucky Hall Street. Athletes are more likely to survive because the type of cardiac arrest they have is more likely to be one that is rescued, is helped by a defibrillator.